So this is the first edition, part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel, being broadcast live on the internet, online, not on the satellite or terrestrial or cable platforms. This is a unique edition because the like of which is not available anywhere else. That is a fact. Diagnosing Fleet Street. Fleet Street is the collective description of the newspapers published from London and collectively promoted and peddled by the BBC and Sky News, which wrongly refer to them as national newspapers. Not national at all. And we're going to diagnose these papers starting with the cartoon in today's Times newspaper, the cartoon by Peter Brooks. The cartoon by Peter Brooks is, of course, compared to some of his rival cartoonists, is worth a look. But today's one is actually meaningful in many ways that even the Peter Brooks cartoons are not. Because while his cartoons sometimes are funny, kind of almost satirical, but this one is probably a historic first by Murdoch newspaper. Okay, where is the... Well, that's where it is. So we shall put that cartoon on the Khoodeelaar Twitter account, so you can look at the actual full extent of it. So it's saying on the right of the kind of cartoon, as we see, the viewer looks at it and it says the Cameron of Arabia. That is a take on the Lawrence of Arabia myth. And if we can go a bit nearer, that's the Cameron of Arabia. And what he is doing is referring to the murder of the Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And it says that the Times actually says in the copy that Jamal Khashoggi was murdered on the order of this person, who is the so-called crown prince, who is now riding on the camel. And the camel's face is Cameron. So he's riding on the back of David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the UK. Now we have diagnosed factually, evidentially, and consistently throughout the last almost 10 years since Cameron got in and was kept in place, installed in the post of the Cameron was the post holder in the post of so-called Prime Minister. And he was kept there by the corrupt collusion, that is condemn collusion. The condemn it sounds the same, and it is intended to sound the same, but the spelling is con as in cons and dem as in Lib Dems. And the criminal alliance that kept Cameron in place was made possible by the liar Nick Clegg. Nick Clegg, now lying for Facebook and Zuckerberg, who has paid Nick Clegg more money than Clegg could ever imagine. And that is worth the payment, because the service that Nick Clegg is performing for Mark Zuckerberg is priceless. He's spying on the British and the others, and he's feeding information, all the information that Nick Clegg had access to, both as an MP and then as the so-called deputy to David Cameron, from the May 2010 until the so-called election in 2015. And so Peter Brooks is painting Cameron as the camel being ridden by Mohammed bin Salman, who is carrying the coffin of Jamal Khashoggi on his back. And Cameron is also depicted as carrying lots of money, and the caption to that container is called Green Swill. And all of these are current topical items in the news. So the point is, if Cameron is the camel, the corrupt courier, I mean, we don't want to defame or slander any actual camel, because no camel can be accused of any corruption or crime. So it's a kind of tropical desert depiction that Peter Brooks is doing. And that is the use of the camel. He could have used a cart or a car or something in another context, geographical context, but he's using the camel because that expresses the kind of context of the desert more effectively. And we shall read more about this corrupt Cameron before we move on to any other title in Fleet Street. And before we do that, we shall say that Peter Brooks is not only rare in the sense that he's actually doing something, a cartoon, which actually shows that the money, the Saudi corrupt money, has bought the soul of David Cameron. And that says a lot. This is not something that has been admitted by the Times itself in the contents of the copy on the Cameron corruption and scandal. And there is an updated kind of version of the role that Cameron has been playing as the one who has sold his soul and has been paid too much money. Okay, so this is the copy from the first page of the Times today, which the first page is not the main item about Cameron, but it is The Cameron's corruption item is on the front page, which is there, just underneath that picture. That's where it is. Well, there is a lighting kind of issue, but the Cameron lobbied this MBS, which is the abbreviation of this name, Mohammed bin Salman, despite murder claim. That's the heading. Quite clear heading. Now, people have to think. I mean, our analysis, factual analysis, remains and has been consistently that Britain is in the dark ages and descending fast into the deeper kind of depth of darkness and corruption, criminality, fascism, and denial of democracy and racism. Now, anyone who has come across any of our broadcasts, not accompanied by the like the headlines in the Times today, or the depiction of Cameron as Mohammed bin Salman's camel, loaded with lots of money, may have thought that we were exaggerating. This is a disclaimer. This is an analytical, evidential, factual disclaimer that I have to kind of intermittently repeatedly make, sometimes because I believe that an explanation is needed. Because most people who are viewing this, or most people ordinarily, wouldn't have access to the information that I have access to, or I have created access to, let's say. The description of Cameron as a habitual racist liar, which is what I have used against him, is not based on my kind of unfounded zeal to give him that kind of a description, because I don't like the man. It's nothing to do with personal like or dislike. It is to do with the fact that this guy, Cameron, was imposed as prime minister. And as he was imposed as prime minister, he had the duties, basic duties of care and duties to be honest and duties to be fair and everything. That is what the expectation is. That is what the basis for claiming legitimacy for being incumbent in that post is linked to it and based on and founded on. But now we know, not now just about this Saudi kind of thing, but we have known since Cameron called the Brexit nightmare, they have brought about the Brexit nightmare, that Cameron was a liar. And within months of entering number 10 Downing Street, Cameron came to Tower Hamlets in February 2011, which was June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. Less than a year. 9 months. And he arrived at 28 Commercial Street, not Commercial Road, which is not far from the Commercial Street, but the Commercial Street is where number 28, the Toynbee Hall, is based. And the Toynbee Hall was used to further the lies and hatred and stupidities and ignorance against the poor people, against the Muslims, and against the other targets of those who grab hold of power and abuse power and loot and rob the country. Now, when I say that, I say that on the evidence that is available. It's not a hypothesis. But the fact that this evidence is available to me doesn't mean that it is even recognized by most people of any background, any race, ethnicity, gender, whatever. So that is why this world exclusive diagnosis is original, substantial, and rigorous in the sense that none of the contents that we are broadcasting and I'm broadcasting is available anywhere else. I keep saying this because the test of the power and the relevance of this endeavor is in the veracity and the integrity and the actual truthfulness of all these contents that I'm saying and being broadcast here on this channel. And the BBC doesn't do this. BBC doesn't have anything like this. Not does Sky, not does, of course, the channel called ITV, which has been fueling hatred through the racist, anti-Muslim liar, Piers Moron, for too long. So, yesterday we talked about Yasmin Alibai. Now, I call her Yasmin Alibai and not Yasmin Alibai Brown, because the Brown is the kind of bit that has been added to her name by that transfer of matrimony by that brown man from Marina Salandi Brown to Yasmin Alibai Brown. Now, Marina Salandi Brown is somebody I know personally. Well, I knew, not personally in the personal sense, but I knew her as a person because she was present among the people that attended the launch activities of the Black Media Workers Association at the beginning of the 1980s that I was one of the founders of. So, again, 40 years ago. So, Marina Salandi Brown, later on, as a result of her kind of association with the Black Media Workers Association that I founded, I was one of the founders of, got herself a career at the BBC. And when she got the career at the BBC, she, of course, didn't practice most of the kind of aims and purposes that the Black Media Workers Association was advocating on behalf of Black media workers 40 years ago. But that's a side description of her in contrast to what she would have promised to do. Yasmin Alibai Brown wasn't anything to do with the Black Media Workers Association, and we had not come across her as a quote journalist until several years later when she was recruited by the racists and anti-Muslims to serve as an exhibit, quote, Muslim woman. And that was the effective kind of selling point for them to propagate anti-Muslim hatred and peddle the lies and inventions that another Muslim writer, another very suspicious, dodgy Muslim writer, Saitan Rushdie, had been paid to package and pack. Now, I shall come to discuss all of Saitan Rushdie's books that have been promoted by the media. And I would do the same thing with Freak Dondi, who criminally kind of parasited himself around the Bangladeshi community in Brick Lane and wrote several kind of quote books and got some television things, including a defamatory 2 scripts that he broadcast. One directly attacking me So anyone who is watching this is to understand that I am somebody who is central to the campaign against racism in the media and also racism generally in this country. And I have been for a long time. And I have been because I do think, as I come across there, consistently, factually, evidentially, universally. And I want others to do that, but if they don't do that, then I cannot delay my intervention, which is what I am doing here. Now, this piece about Cameron defying the warning that he should not associate himself with Mohammed bin Salman, because Salman had been, this MBS so-called had been publicly accused of ordering the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Now, this is something that Fleet Street has not tackled until this thing about Cameron lobbying for another company came out for something else. So they're linking Cameron's dodgy and corrupt behavior and his proximity with MBS of Saudi Arabia is not coming because the media suddenly become aware of their duties to uphold the rights of the victims of the likes of MBS, or to uphold the democratic and human rights of Muslims in Britain and anywhere else who are being persecuted or denied service and denied equality and access. So what the Times is saying, apparently against Cameron's role, is not honest. The heading is Cameron lobbied MBS despite murder claim. Now, it has to be read in order to be understood fully and appreciated fully. Oliver Wright, policy editor, writes this. This is something unprecedented. They have not accused a former, let alone a current British Prime Minister, of anything like this in the past. And they could have said a lot of things against the role that Tony Blair played in the genocide and the massacres of the Afghans and the Iraqis and other Muslims. But they didn't. And they still don't. Now, this paragraph is absolutely significant and telling and stunning. David Cameron went on a desert camping trip to lobby Mohammed bin Salman only months after the Saudi Crown Prince, that is Mohammed bin Salman, ordered the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Now, there is no quotation marks, so there is no distancing. I mean, this policy editor, Oliver Wright, is not distancing himself from the contents of the paragraph. So he is personally saying that Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Is not saying that somebody else has said that. That paragraph, they may say that somebody else has said that or another source has said that later. But in that paragraph, it is direct assertion that Jamal Khashoggi was murdered on the order of bin Salman. The next paragraph says Cameron was invited on the trip in his role as a paid advisor. Notice what Cameron is being described as. Cameron was invited on the trip in his role as a paid advisor and lobbyist for the billionaire Australian financier Lex Greensill, whose company Greensill Capital collapsed this month. So that collapse is what has prompted and triggered, let's say, these connections that the Times and other Fleet Street and mainstream British media are making. They would love to not have to make that kind of connection, but they are left with hardly any choice because big business is bigger than Cameron or Boris Johnson or Tony Blair. So let's look at this. At the time of the trip, early last year, notice this. This is absolutely shocking recognition of something else, and I'll explain why it is shocking. At the time of the trip early last year, a United Nations report had already found credible links between the Crown Prince and the murder of Khashoggi in October 2018. The United Nations does exist, but the British media, Fleet Street, and British politicians don't recognize the United Nations. And this is the shocking thing. They should be, but they don't. And the fact that they don't has 90% to do with the fact that they don't want to uphold the various principles of the United Nations, various agreements and treaties and charters and conventions, which are signed formally by the British state. But the British politicians and the British media don't want to recognize those, just like they didn't want to recognize some of the similar kind of treaties and instruments, that is to say, legal constitutional agreements and statements connected with or derived from the UK's membership of the European Union. Because all of those, the United Nations ones and the European Union linked ones, are about enlightenment in comparison with the darkness of Little England and the darkness that Brexit is and has been kind of promoted by, because the darkness is the force. Darkness and backwardness and injustice and cruelty are the founding kind of basis of what is Little England. Think about that. Remember what I've just said. It's not, you cannot find this in any newspaper, let alone in any book or any report. And we shall come to, in this part, we shall come to report as well. Because only in the next item, look at this. This is the one. This is the Little Englanders, racists, absolutely corruptly lying. This is not true. This is not true because diverse UK hailed over narrowing of race gap. That is absolutely lying, untruthful, invention by the liars, doing the lying for Boris Johnson. For a start, Britain is not a diverse UK at all. If you look at and there are other reports, as I said, so just bear with me. Because all of these are in the front page of the Times, at least represented in terms of kind of headings. The report about the London Metropolitan Police's attacks on the mourners at the vigil in memory of and in honor of Sarah Everard, murdered by a serving Metropolitan policeman. You cannot get worse than that. It cannot get darker than that. So that report into the police's behavior at the demonstration has cleared the police. I mean, it's astonishing. Just like Cameron going to lobby bin Salman on a desert kind of freebie to lobby for Saudi money for the Australian financial Lex Greensill. So that's one side. The other is the diverse report, which is the That diverse report is that word diverse and its derivative, the diversity. These are lying kind of abuses of that concept. First of all, they don't use multiracial or multi-ethnic. They dropped that. That one was in use for a decade or so, 2 decades or so. But because of the role played by nephew Tom, Trevor Terrible Peelips, and other mental slaves that the racists recruited and deployed over decades to deny racism in Britain, they have dropped the use of the multiple, multi-ethnic or multiracial Britain. And when they were using it at the beginning, I was one of the main opponents of that because I said, they're saying it, but it's not multiracial. It is a racist. So I'm not changing my position because the evidence hasn't changed for the better, let's say. So when they replaced that with the diverse or diversity, they didn't actually replace the practice of racism, racist kind of segregation. Because racist segregation has been ongoing right from the beginning and right from the time of August 1947, when they so-called allegedly left the subcontinent and gave up the so-called Raj. When I say so-called, viewers are asked to kind of consider that as a condition. That what I'm saying is so-called, by adding so-called, means that whatever the expression is, diversity or so-called diversity, has to be treated as not being straightforward and normally, acceptably expressed, if you like, as the evidence suggests that there is contradiction, conflict, denial, and lack of substance, and lack of sincerity, and all the rest of it in the actual behavior that is under reference. So they said that diverse UK hailed over narrowing of race gap. The UK is not diverse for start because communities that exist in mainly the main urban centers like London, Birmingham, to a lesser extent Manchester, and as you approach the demographically smaller kind of cities and urban centers, diversity is not what you find. You find parts of those centers, including London, where people from, let's say, Pakistani origin people, you can find in London. Significant numbers of them you can find in the London Borough of Newham. And Bangladeshi origin people you can find significant numbers in next door Tower Hamlets. And the Indian origin people, the counterparts of the Bangladeshis and the Pakistanis separately, of course, you find in the West London Borough of Ealing. For example, not exclusively in Ealing, but significantly in the Ealing Borough, where Southall is the place which is identified as being the center of the borough, where most of the people are from India or Indian background. Now, India is, of course, itself made up of many nations and many ethnicities. But here we are referring to the main state, the Federation of India, a part of which is the Indian Punjab, and a lot of people in the Southall area are from the Punjab, but not all of them. But there are other parts of London, other boroughs of the 32 London boroughs in London that have people from both India, various parts of India, and from Bangladesh and Pakistan. But the significant numbers of people from India are to be found in Ealing, in South. And as I said, in Newham, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis, but Indians are as well available in Newham. And Bangladeshis in the main, from the subcontinent, that is, to be found in Tar hamlets and in other parts of the country as well. What these presences are undeniable evidence that Britain is not a diverse society. Because the reason why these people have been settling in that kind of number in any part of this country is not about their wanting to be kind of not neighbors to the so-called indigenous white people, but because they cannot be sure that they will be safe if they lived individually next door to white people. And there have been so many factors, the decisions about housing, allocation, and everything else, about jobs, all of these factors have forced these communities to look for safety in numbers against racist attack and hostility by living next to one another or living as close to other fellow Bangladeshis or other fellow Indians or other fellow Pakistanis as possible. Remember? So that is why it is absolutely absurd to call Britain a diverse society. It's not. And every day, every single day of the last 11 years, calendar years, let's say, since the Conservatives were given the power by the racist idiot Gordon Brown, because the election of 2010, May 2010, general election of May 2010, was lost by the idiocies of Gordon Brown and the corruption and the lack of accountability and the war crimes by the Tony Blair. Because although the racists don't mind the war crimes against Muslims, the fact that the war criminal Tony Blair actually discredited his legitimacy helped the general commentary and narrative against the Labour government that the Conservatives needed. Remember what I'm saying? And everything I say is fact-based, fact-checked. So I don't say anything for decoration. And the purpose of this, as well as everything else that this campaign does or this movement does, and I have been doing and I do, is to enlighten, to inform, and to universally educate anyone watching. It's not a career move. I don't need a career. I never needed a career in the conventional sense. I've always been engaged in looking for the evidence and asserting the evidence and the findings. And this is today's Times newspaper is lying on all three counts. It is appearing to be telling the truth, but it is lying because, and I shall go over these three headings and three topics again. This item about the police being cleared and the politicians being criticized over the police attacks on the peaceful vigil and the misrepresentation by the police of the actual agreement between the campaigners for women to be able to be safely walking in the streets and the police. The whole thing is a misrepresentation by the Times. Because what it is doing, it thinks that saying politicians are criticized, but the police are praised. It is so untruthful on every count that it needs to be completely dispelled. And I'm going to do that. For a start, the headline is completely wrong because the police have not been cleared by all the evidence. They've been cleared by a police peddling bureaucracy called the watchdog. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. It is totally bogus. It is totally bogus and corrupt and unaccountable and untruthful. Because the people who have been attacked by the police, including this young woman, Patsy Stevenson, whose photograph of her being held down by policemen, has been circulated right across the world, at least among the franchise members that buy the kind of media materials that one was a part of. And this young person was held down by the police for no reason at all. So there is a thing about the kind of playground bullies. This girl was being bullied by the police to alert others or alarm others or to intimidate others. She wasn't breaking the law, and she wasn't threatening anyone, and she was not putting anyone at risk of catching the COVID-19 virus. So what this headline on the Times about the police, in effect, has been paraphrased and repeated more brazenly by other Fleet Street papers today. So that's one. The police misconduct has been elevated to police doing saintly job, like the police were saints and they were doing society a favor by doing their job, or misconducting themselves when they should have been doing their job of allowing these women to mourn peacefully. The woman who had been murdered for just walking in the streets of London from her friend's place to her home. It is not policing by consent. And it is not going to be helping society generally or police persons if the police are not subjected to democratic, ethical, rigorous, and continuous audit and accountability and transparency. Because police can endanger lives of people, can threaten the safety of people in society. And every aspect of the public order part of society is affected directly by the thinking of every single police person. So it's too serious and too pervasive and too regular, 24/7 impact it has on the rest of society. For those reasons, policing has to be made subject to a real democratic audit and accountability on a regular basis, not periodically, not as part of a kind of one-off outrage or whatever. For that, there has to be a constitutional structure for policing, which doesn't exist. A legal accountability structure for policing, which doesn't exist. A democratic, ethical, transparent, and respectful to society policing formula, framework, that doesn't exist. And it all has to be created at a very fast speed, faster speed than has been seen in the production of the so-called vaccine for the COVID-19. Too many people are affected. Too many people are denied what is theoretically, what is in the slogan claimed to be available, that is police service. Police service is withheld as routine from most people of African and Asian background. Full stop. Police service is never available. And this is not something that is treated as absolutely outrageously unacceptable and racist. But this is racist. Because the police are not subject to the parliamentary kind of scrutiny that doesn't exist anyway on anything. Parliament has routine committees for scrutinizing various departments, but it really doesn't scrutinize. So that's the point. And when the kind of nearest scrutineering committee, the Home Affairs Committee, was chaired, or let's say plagued by the chair, Keith Slees-Vaz. He never ever addressed the issues that I'm raising here. And Vaz is a proven liar. So the other people in the committee, the Home Affairs Committee, which Slees-Vaz plagued for too long as chair, they were as bad as him. Notice what I'm saying. So the members of parliament who had the theoretical notional remit to look at the police, examine the police behavior, and that was the committee called the Home Affairs Select Committee, failed to do any of the things that have been overdue for too long. And it failed over all these years through which Keith Slees-Vaz chaired that committee. And there is no other committee in the House of Commons that is remotely linked with the actual examination of the evidence of the behavior of the police, let alone of the evidence of the consequences of police behavior. Now, since Slees-Vaz gave up, was forced to give up, and ceased to be an MP following serial, aggravated kind of acts of sleaze and corruption by him, the chair has been taken over by somebody else who is even worse than Slees-Vaz himself was. So the police in this country are not being held to account in the right place by the right kind of people, which is the elected members of parliament, despite the fact that so many of the candidates for election and so many of the elected MPs have records and interests and connections that actually morally expose them and kind of compromise their morality. Having said all of that, there has to be some accountability and auditing done of the police for the sake of the police and for the sake of society. Let's look at the possibility that a serving police person is committing crime. There are too many serving police persons who commit crimes. And these are not behavior conduct that are open to be scrutinized by independent democratic bodies or associations or forums. These are all left to internal police kind of outlets and outfits to apparently deal with. And they, by definition, cannot deal with it properly, and they cannot deal with it independently and selflessly. The whole thing is compromised. So this report on the top, at the top of the front page of the Times, is a corrupt report, and corruptly written report, corruptly paraded report, because it starts with the criticism of the politicians. The politicians didn't do anything to the demonstrators. It was the police. The politicians only echoed the outrage that actual victims of the police misconduct had been expressing after the or during the actual misconduct on the demonstration. So it is factually completely, absolutely wrong of the Times to put the politicians ahead of the police in this coverage of the cover-up of the report. And this report, as it says, is by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. Now, this is unbelievable, because the Times is saying that Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, etc., condemn the chorus of public figures who attacked the Metropolitan Police after the arrest of female protesters in Clapham Common. This is worse than what is happening in China, or what's happening in Putin's Russia. If the public figures didn't reflect concern and condemnation of the police attacking women protesters, then surely there is no right to protest, there is no morality anymore in Britain. That all of these things have been banned already by the fronter of the fascist regime, that is Boris Johnson. Think about this. So we're not reading all the rest of the piece, but this is just the front page. So they've got 3 pieces on the front page of the Times. All of them are distorting. They're giving news, but appearance of news, but underneath they're actually suppressing the truth and giving misinformation, running false news, the Times. As I said about diversity doesn't exist. And we go back to the actual personnel who joined together in some of the street patrolled by the police, Metropolitan Police. And you don't see mixed police persons. That is to say, white and African or white and Asian police person. You see all white groups of police on too many occasions, and the appearance of the police, the black ones, is very rationed and very much infrequent. Now, We are not speaking on behalf of any policeman, and we are not speaking against any particular individual police persons, except any police that have been kind of found to have been guilty of crimes. So what happens when the white police go on patrol? That's when most of the complained of misconduct take place. And there is no independent audit body or platform that actually truthfully, consistently examines the evidence and gives its findings and verdicts strictly on the basis of universal criteria and for the benefit of society, for the safety of society, and safety of the individual police persons who are, by definition, individually concerned as being fascists, bullies, racists, and sexists. If there is a serious audit of the policing by independent forums, then all suspicion, if you like, or all grounds of suspicion of bias and racism and sexism would be tackled, and the police would be clear that no vested interest is active in the giving of the opinion or the findings. And that would enhance the credibility of the police vis-a-vis the rest of society. But that is not available now. There is no likelihood that in the near future police will be audited and held to account. And the longer it is not done, it is denied or delayed, the less likely it is that police will be trusted by the ordinary public. The actual consent, the consent will become eroded to a point where police will become direct targets of direct retaliation, as the police have been claiming has been happening in places like Bristol. But there will be far more kind of incidents of hostility and confrontations between the police and the democracy campaigners, let's say, defenders of democracy against police state, which is what is effectively being operated now. There is a police state that no criticism of police misconduct is allowed. And this is part of the narrative that the Times is peddling in common with the rest of Fleet Street, that there is no racism in Britain. They're saying the diverse UK hailed over narrowing of race gap. It's absolute lie. It's a statement by Munira Mirza. It's a statement confected by Munira Mirza as an agent of Boris Johnson, as a stooge of Boris Johnson, whom Mirza, of Pakistani origin, has known for too long. And Mirza, who went to the Label Catcher, Oxford, has been linked to it being at Oxford at the same time as, or about the same time as Johnson. Whether they were familiar with one another has not been elaborated on. But Mirza, the daughter of a parent or parents of Pakistani origin, is a peddler of racism against Pakistani origin people, let's say. Just like Sajid Javid, the son of a Pakistani bus driver, was when he was in Home Office as Home Secretary. And his biggest notoriety is attached to the fact that he snatched the British by birth citizenship from Shamima Begum. So we talk about Shamima Begum now. As we have said, Shamima Begum, as she is now, age 21 plus, is not the main purpose of the campaign for justice for these girls and for Shamima Begum, for the refusal of service, refusal of legally owed duty to protect them and safeguard these children by the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council, which, as one of the boroughs, had the duties to safeguard children. And as I said before, the list of things that need to be done to comply with the duty of safeguarding children, that list is not available, for the simple reason that every situation, every kind of crisis or every issue faced by children needing safeguarding differs from the other incident or incidents. So it's a flexible list. It's not a confined list. It's not a limited list. Anything that on the facts needs to be done to safeguard the safety of the child and the children is included. So when these children were children up to the age of 19, let's say, they were in need of help and support and protection. And the need of support, help, and protection had existed for another few years before that. I've said this before, but I'm repeating this contextually in order to make sure that anyone watching this for the first time or anyone who has watched this before but was not able to concentrate on the facts can get another kind of chance to get the facts. And the facts are that these children were children when they were targeted. And we now know that at least one of them, Sharmina Begum, was comprehensively targeted and manipulated by two women called the Sisters Forum, based at the East London Mosque in Whitechapel in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. Now, if this was happening, then the safeguarding children duty administrators and duty performers in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council should have been aware at the time, and they should have put an end to that brainwashing and grooming program. And they didn't. And all the things that have happened since, and all the things that happened because of the Tower Hamlets Council's denial of duty to these children are down to the Tower Hamlets Council neglecting its safeguarding duties. All the consequences. So it doesn't matter which one. The consequences of these children going out of this country and into a war zone would have been prevented. It would have been kind of made impossible by a caring and actually engaged performers or performer of safeguarding children duties in and on behalf of the Tower Hamlets Council. The fact that they didn't, the fact that the Tower Hamlets Council didn't perform that duty or those details of the duties directly caused the children to be derailed and to be engaged in further complicated issues, both during the rest of their childhood and also now, 2 years or so since they ceased to be children. Think about this. We are looking at the root cause and we have identified the main sources of the negligence. Now, there are reports about Shamima Begum having told a documentary maker that one of the reasons why she went to Syria, remember, we are only referring to published sources. We have no contact with Shamima Begum or any of her biological relations or any of her friends or anybody. We are not in contact with any of them. What we are relying on is publicly assertable facts and accessible facts. And the main central fact is that Tower Hamlets Council was duty bound to protect these children when they were children. And the Tower Hamlets Council didn't. And therefore the Tower Hamlets Council's failure is directly linked with the events that followed and have followed. So we are saying that any possibility that these children would go anywhere near anything that would take them away from their home and into a dangerous, risky place should have been immediately, comprehensively dealt with by the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council as part of the council's funded program or duties to safeguard children. Think about what I'm saying. I'm saying that there was a legal duty, clear legal duty for Tower Hamlets Council to carry out safeguarding duties in order to save these children from serious risk, which has happened. Because the council neglected its safeguarding duties to the children. So who are the Tower Hamlets Council? Tower Hamlets Council is the council elected by local voters, including the voters of Bethnal Green, where these children are from. Now, we are moving on to the scum today, which is extraordinarily performing a complete contradictory, racist, lying stunt. Because this is a stunt. Two apparently mixed race black men are being put on the front page saying that because of racism, one of them has actually left social media because of racism. They're saying it. No qualms, no condition, no deniability in that. That's what they're saying, right? And yet, inside the same issue of this scum, they're saying that there is no racism in this country. Think about it. Now, this is the spread based on the interview given to one mixed race black man by another mixed race black man. And this is an interview that asserts that there are too many racists and they're unacceptable and unbearable. So one of them has been forced to leave social media because of racism. Okay? So you'd think that that is straightforward. You would be wrong. You would be wrong because the racist scum would never accept that there is racism. Absolutely not. And although the scum is what is called lowbrow, that is to say, it is supposedly for ordinary people, not very highly educated and all the rest of it, or highly schooled. It is read by too many people, so it's for that reason, legitimate item for examining and scrutinizing and diagnosing and taking apart. Now, these racist liars say that Britain is not racist. Look at that. So, what can you do about that? They're so brazen in your face. They've got 2 pages spread saying that Britain is racist. And then they're editorially saying, no, there is no racism in Britain. So what do? What they're saying, therefore, is that all the victims of racism at every stage, victims of racism in the judiciary, in the court system, in the court procedures, in access to the courts, victims of racism in jobs, in housing, victims of racism in the street, on the transport and public transport, victims of racism in every street in Britain, the scum is saying they are not being attacked and they are not being racistly attacked. So what that denial says is that people who are attacked by racists deserve to be attacked by racists, which means that by denying, the scum is actually joining the racists in a barefaced, disgraceful, immoral, sick-making denial. And then there is this defense of the serial liar and serial adulterer, Boris Johnson, by Jane Moore. She is attacking this American woman for having the affair with Boris Johnson, not Boris Johnson for having the affair with her. Because at all times, all material times during the so-called affair, Johnson has been married. So any married person who is having an affair, even one affair, knows it is absolutely, totally kind of difficult situation, let's say. It's not something to be recommended or commended. And Boris Johnson has been a habitual, ritual kind of adulterer. But the details of his adultery with Jennifer R. Curry are not the only things that are embarrassing and evidence of his unfitness. The fact that he was abusing his relationship with her for stealing public money to give to her, that is effectively what happened. For abusing the public kind of access and giving access to her when that was completely in conflict of interest and totally unacceptable and not to be commended for the benefit of the society. All of those things are wrong, and none of those things are accepted as being wrong by the stupid, lying Jane Moore. She is accusing Jennifer R. Curry of having gone into the affair without realizing that it would not last. Why should the onus be on Jennifer R. Curry that the affair would not last? And even if she didn't think that it would not last, I mean, what is the crime in that? The crime, if any, is in the affair itself, not whether it will last or not. That is not either here or there. So what I'm showing here is that the entirety of the corrupt, dirty digger enterprise, the scum and the Times newspapers, are dedicated to shoring up the lying cons. And currently the lying con is, of course, the main one is Boris Johnson, and everything he does wrong, they are distorting whole kind of events to blame other people for the wrongs and misconduct and illegality and the criminality of Boris Johnson. Think about these facts I'm saying. And if they say that there is some wrong in Boris Johnson behavior in one particular, then they reverse it in the next moment and next sentence by saying somebody else was to blame for his wrongs and wrongdoings. And they're running pages and pages of racist kind of denials, as they're doing today in the Sciences, pages 16 and 17 for Sharon Osbourne. Because they're saying that Sharon Osbourne was a victim of supporters of Meghan and Harry. But that's not true. Because what Boris Johnson and Piers Morgan and Andrew Neil and all the others have been allowed to do is to be racist, make racist remarks, and then they'll say that is the racist remark is their freedom of speech. Think about that. Racist remark is never freedom of speech. It's the opposite of freedom of speech. I said in October 1976, in a talk I gave in Edinburgh, at a gathering that had been organized to show solidarity to the people in Edinburgh, the Sikh people, S-I-K-H, the Sikh religious group, who were being attacked by racists in 1976 in Edinburgh. So I was invited, somebody who knew me, and I gave a speech, the fact of which was mentioned in the Scotsman on the 10th of October 1976, I think. So I would have spoken on the 9th of October. And the report in the Scotsman of my speech was clearly an ignorant report, because it was written by a white man who was an ignorant racist man, despite the fact that he did write a report. And can you imagine the man? He was described by his one of his tutors at Oxford as being the most clever student ever. And this clever student ever, also went to Eton College. So for him to get my speech so wrong as he did, as evident in the copy that he published in the Scotsman on, I think, 10th of October 1976, summed it up all those years ago. And that stupidity and ignorance and racist backwardness of journalism persists today. Here is the piece that they've written, condemning what I would think, condemning the spokesperson and advocate for care and respect for the victims of mental health. They're attacking her because Piers Morgan had no right to say that he doesn't believe her at all. He has no claim to discredit her about her concern about mental health. I mean, how dare he? How would he know? The only reason why he attacked her was because he's a racist and he wants to undermine her because of her allegations of racism against Brenda's monarchy. And Sharon Osbourne is not somebody that has made a single original contribution in her entire career. So one parasite, Piers Moron, is being linked with another parasite to make a claim about Meghan, which is not about Meghan. They're parasiting themselves. Because the fact is that Sharon Osbourne is having problems with the CBS for some time because she's not good. So they really made it clear to her that she was no good, really. So she had to go. So how does she go? She doesn't want to go based on her inadequacy and lack of skills and qualities. She has to say that she's a heroine. She is Mrs. Outspoken, who is a martyr, along with Piers Moron, for their racism. She is a racist, as is Moron, and the two racists asserting the right to dismiss the very serious issues of mental health raised by Meghan Markle. So it is sick. The Murdoch scum is sick to that extent. And so for a minute we go back to the Times and look at the contradictions there, perpetuating there. I mean, now, the report about the Munira Mirza report is kind of peddled by tagging it to a corrupt, self-seeking idiot that was given a column by the Vice newspaper when it was founded. And his name is Tony Sewell. The contribution that Sewell is making is very similar to the contribution made by Trevor Terrible Phillips, because it is saying that the claims that UK is institutionally racist are not founded. I mean, if you look at the picture of Tony Sewell, he is very dark, and just like Trevor Terrible Phillips. And what these two dark-skinned exhibits have been useful for is that when they are put before any audience, the fact that they're very dark-skinned is noticeable. And dark-skinned people coming out with Macaulayite servitude and denial actually confound the truth and destroy the chance to pinpoint the existence of racism. Too many dark-skinned people have been found historically or on the facts to be too servile to the racist masters, mistresses, and kind of controllers. And Tony Sewell is one of them. The reason is that they compensate with too much kind of distortion of the truth by coming across as being too loyal and too grateful. And that is one of the things that Boris Johnson has achieved here with Munira Mirza. Because Munira Mirza, like Yasmin Alibai in the 1990s, let's say, is now serving as a quote Muslim woman to retail some of the most poisonous anti-Muslim ideas and slogans and lines. I mean, the same role that was played by Samira Ahmed, who was initially recruited by Channel 4, and then she found her way into the BBC later. She too has been the most obstructive of Muslim participation or Muslim kind of representation in terms of the contents. And Cart Barling, who for many years appeared on the BBC television channel, BBC London outlet, lost his job to a more servile black person and is now posturing as a kind of expert on racism. Now, his expertise is not as brazen and as corrupt as Munira Mirza's or Tony Sewell's or Trevor Terrible Phillips. His one is a kind of cagey, opportunistic balancing act. So, for example, in his contribution that he started recently in the last few days, I think yesterday, maybe, or 2 days ago, on the Press Gazette online, mentions the two bodies to do with Muslim communities, Council of Mosque and another body, as authorities or authoritative sources about the rise of anti-Muslim racism and hatred. But in quoting them, he gets the facts wrong, as they do, because they both follow their so-called racist kind of targets of criticism, they follow their language, they follow their terminology. And the terminology, which is telling and central in this context, is to be found in the word Islamophobia. Now, Islamophobia is a conjunct. That is to say, it's a word made up of two words or two concepts, two terms, Islam and phobia. You add Islam and phobia together and you find Islamophobia. Now, phobia, of course, means fear. Now, the meaning of Islam in the Arabic is peace. So, if you say that Islam is fear, then it is not Islam at all, is it? I mean, even the beginning in the concept, you are distorting and denying. So, people say that, say, for example, Tommy Robinson. To these people, like Kurt Barling, Tommy Robinson would be an Islamophobe. That is to say, he would attack Muslims. And the act of his attacking Muslims would be describable as being Islamophobic. And any individual person who is Islamophobic is, of course, in the structure to be called an Islamophobe, one who fears Islam. Think about this. I'm taking it stage by stage. If somebody is afraid of Islam, then you cannot accuse them of being against Islam, can you? And yet this is what these people who say that Tommy Robinson and other anti-Muslim people are being Islamophobic by attacking Muslims. Because if Islam is to be feared, then it is understandable, at least, that somebody is entitled to fear Islam and therefore say or do things that distance Islam from them or they from Islam. So the word that should be using is not Islamophobic, but anti-Islamic. Anti-Islamic or anti-Muslim, which they don't use, but they should use. So that's a linguistic lesson there about how so-called opponents of anti-Islamic racism end up endorsing anti-Islamic rhetoric and language themselves, thus defeating the purpose of opposing anti-Muslim and anti-Islamic attacks. Think about that. And the Guardian, as I said, is descending into darkness every single day. I mean, it completely eliminates the existence of the concept of fascism, sexism, male violence against women. These are not terms that the Guardian wants to use. So it becomes banal, completely plastic. Look at this headline. Police vigil. Okay, police vigil behavior cleared by report. It doesn't refer to police attack on women, police attack on democracy protesters, police attack on peaceful demonstration. None of those. So it becomes completely banal and meaningless, devoid of substance. That one, that is the one. So what the Guardian is doing, quite apart from that one, which is not an original piece, it's a retelling of the police's propaganda release yesterday that all the fleet street is actually repeating. Now, anyone watching this program and the movement, familiar with the movement over any significant period, would know that I personally have repeatedly asserted that anything I say or publish is only ever published or said based on the evidence and based on the principles that I have reiterated time and again of universality, objectivity, ethics, morality, universality, and universal attributes of equality. So I don't do anything that is not factually, thoroughly fact-checked and sustainable by evidence. Having said that, I have always found that among the people of the African continent and Asian continent generally, and among the allegedly sophisticated ones, the careerists, there is a common thread of ignorance and stupidity. And that is not sustainable on the evidence of the particular issues if you look at and examine the evidence. So I'm still surprised, and I'm still surprised now as to why, I have to be the one to insist on this universality, the values of transparency, equality, and morality, and nobody else is doing the same thing. And I conclude that because they've got personal interests or career interests or selfish purposes, that can be the only reason why they don't do what they should do, because the information that I find can be found by others as well. And the truth of many issues that I actually publish and publicize is not something that is secret. That is to say, the truth can be found by others if they wanted to look for the evidence. And yet there is no acknowledgement by any of them of the existence of the truth, except by me. So, when somebody like Peter Shore, the MP for one of the constituencies, Bethnal Green and Bow, let's say what is now Bethnal Green and Bow in Tower Hamlets, when in 1978, Peter Shore held a meeting in a room in the Toynbee Hall, with I would say about 10 or 15, mainly Bangladeshi men. And I arrived, and Peter Shore said to me that I was not invited to the meeting. I mean, for a start, I didn't need to attend that meeting, let's say. I only attended the meeting to see what Peter Shore was going to say. And Peter Shore knew that if I attended the meeting while he was interested in dominating the meeting, then his importance would be significantly diminished, because I would challenge him and I'd call him out and I would expose him. And if he thought that, he would have been absolutely correct, because I would have done that. Now, so would I, having said that, would I, if I were allowed to continue to attend the meeting, would I be doing something wrong for the society, for the community, or for the cause? Or would I be doing the only right thing that needed to be done at the time? And I would say that I would be doing the right thing that needed to be done at the time. And that equation, or disequilibrium, if you like, or disparity or difference, persists to this day. That was 78. So count the number of years. It's more than 40 years. And in between the 40 years or 43 years, I've been doing the same thing on every occasion. So that's the preamble to this piece in The Guardian today about the allegations against Cameron. Because this quotation has been kind of published many times about Cameron recently. There is a far too cozy relationship between government, business, and money. That is what Cameron had said before he became Prime Minister. So what they're saying is that they sent questions to David Cameron, asking him to comment on their kind of findings and the report. And Cameron did not respond. This is the last paragraph on the Guardian on page 5. And the main copy that they wanted Cameron to comment on is headed "Reformer to Lobbyist, ex-Prime Minister who took up the cause of bankers." And it's written by somebody called Rupert Neat. Is a wealth correspondent. And it says, after the 2009 expenses scandal, in which MPs were found to have submitted claims for, among other things, £1,600 floating duck house and a £2,200 bill for cleaning a moat, the then Conservative leader David Cameron warned that political lobbying would be the next big scandal waiting to happen. Cameron took it upon himself to reform the far too cozy relationship between politics, government, business, and money, which he said had tainted our politics for too long. More than a decade later, the former Prime Minister is caught up in what could turn out to be exactly the kind of lobbying scandal he once sought to eradicate. It involves the collapse of the $7 billion, that is £5 billion bank, text message lobbying of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and a desert camping trip with the Saudi prince accused of ordering the brutal murder of a journalist. When he resigned shortly after losing the 2016 Brexit referendum, Cameron promised he would not become a political distraction. He would, he said, be too busy writing his memoir in his two 25,000 pound shepherd's huts at holiday homes in the Cotswolds and Cornwall. He also found time to squeeze in a little public speaking at a rate of 120,000 pounds an hour at the Washington Speakers Bureau. His company, the Office of David Cameron Limited, made a profit of 836,000 pounds in 2019, the most recent year available at Companies House. Meanwhile, George Osborne, who was Cameron's chancellor, has worked as editor of the Evening Standard and is now a partner at an investment banking firm where the previous two partners have shared out 207 million pounds in pay over the last 6 years. Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat Deputy Prime Minister under Cameron, is now Facebook's Vice President of Global Affairs and is said to earn a 7-figure salary. Remember Nick Clegg I mentioned earlier in this program, this edition. There was a period soon after the actor Danny Dyer described Cameron as a twat who had scuttled off to Europe with his trotters up in 2018, that Cameron was said to have told friends he was bored shitless and was considering return to politics, according to The Sun. It has now emerged that Cameron took a different direction, signing up as lobbyist for the controversial billionaire banker Lex Grensill, whose eponymous bank collapsed into administration earlier in March. Greensill Capital's demise has plunged other businesses into crisis, including Liberty Steel, which employs 5,000 people in the UK. Cameron reportedly told friends he was granted stock options worth up to 1% of the company. Last year, Greensill was hoping to float on the stock market at $7 billion valuation which would have valued a 1% stake at $70 million for him. Cameron failed to declare his work for the bank with the official Register of Consultant Lobbyists, a watchdog introduced under his premiership. Cameron's work for Greensill has included lobbying the Chancellor and, according to the Financial Times, going camping in the desert with Lex Greensill and Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, who was found by the US authorities to have approved the 2018 murder of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Now, what the Guardian is doing is again pretending to be telling the truth, but it is not. It is lying because it's hiding too many crucial facts. And I shall list the most important ones here. Cameron and George Osborne, or George Gideon Osborne as he is known as, were responsible for the murder by the DWP of more than 1,000 benefit claimants, the most vulnerable people in Britain among the claimants, by their most needed small amounts of money being denied to them. Thus, they are being forced to commit suicide. Now, the Guardian should mention, because by listing his income like $120,000 or 20,000 pounds per hour, it doesn't actually say what they were doing to other people. That is showing just they're pocketing the money. But the destruction of lives and the murders that took place under the DWP sanctions policy introduced by Cameron and Osborne is not included in that. So it becomes pointless, meaningless. Just saying that they've got money, like it is like saying that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and whatever are billionaires, or they've got hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, doesn't contextually relate to the victims of their corrupt and criminal accumulation of this huge, huge sums of money. And that is the test. That is the reality. That impact on the lives of other people. That is what matters. So what we are going to do, this is just coming up to probably under 2 hours, I think. Or they started at, let's check the time. What time did we start? We started at about 8:25. So this is just under 2 hours. So we shall come back with the rest of the diagnosis of the Des Fleet Street Papers and the diagnosis of the corrupt, racist, criminal, hateful, political careerists and opportunists and their mental slaves, and the nephew Toms and niece Thomas, let's say. How to describe and label Munira Mirza? I mean, she is not a Tom, so is she a Thomasine or what? What is the feminine of the Uncle Tom? We shall explore and investigate and update accordingly.